All right, Austin Heath, thanks for being here today. We are going to dive into prosthetic screws for all NX cases, a topic that you've had quite a bit of experience with, I'm sure. And we know that there's a lot of debate around this topic and preference around this topic and different options with these different screws. So here we have the from left to right. Tell me what screws we have, and then let's start chatting about some pros and cons and use cases and how they behave in these different
Sure, that sounds
prosthetics.
good. And thanks for having me, Rob. Yeah, screws are a big topic now, especially in the full arch market. So on screen, there's four screws. On the left here, this is the DES. This in particular is the DES 19406. It is the 19018, but with the SCS head. So I think a lot of clinicians are familiar with the 018 screw from DES. That is their long version. That's here on the left. And then one to the right, the gold screw is a Vortex screw. And then to the right of that is a Rosen screw. And on the far right, the bronze colored screw, that's a Powerball screw.
All right, so Des, Vortex, Rosen, Powerball. I have heard all of those names, and I have heard a lot of opinions around those. So we'll disclaim this discussion by saying we're not here to promote any one screw, and these are just Austin's opinion and Rob's curious questions around screw design and screw behavior. Also, you have these custom healers above that you make and that you have patents to that go with these different screws, right? And just tell me quickly, what are those for, and how is that utilized in the scanning process? Those custom healers.
Sure. Yeah, so these are custom healing abutments, primarily for full arch cases and for the MUA type connection. So I run a milling center, Elite Dental Manufacturing. I'm not biased to any particular screw. There's a lot of preference out there for which screw to use. And so it's my challenge to be able to manufacture the prosthetics to include that screw. So on screen, you've got the Bullard alignment healer. That is our favorite scan body for all of our full arch cases. There are two different versions. So on the left, you see the standard healer version. It's called the Bullard Alignment Healer. And then you have on the right the narrow version. So the difference between those two, in some cases, you have implants close to each other. So to be able to put a scan body on those two implants that are close together, you might use one or even two narrow
Mm.
healers or alignment devices in that case. But the unique thing about this is that the geometry, so on the narrow one here, you can see the geometry on the top, that matches the same geometry on the larger version, the healer. In the full version, the healer, you can use every single wall. So the top, the sides of this top hat is what we call it, and the axial walls, all for alignment purposes. So it's a unique device. It allows you to capture every different orientation, so X, Y, Z, and any rotation with just two scan bodies, which is kind of unique. A lot of times you need three different scan bodies to make that triangular shape to stabilize that jaw relation. But with the Bullard alignment healer, if you've got two of them, there is plenty enough geometry and shape to capture all of that position for that jaw. But what it does is it lets you use the same library. So you could have like four healers and two narrows in the same scan and use the same portions for alignment. So what these healers do, they allow each one of these screw types, and I have five or six different versions, so five or six different screw types that we manufacture healers for. When you're in surgery and you get done extracting all the teeth and suturing up around your scan bodies, the screw that you're going to use in your final prosthetic is used to hold down this scan body. So when a new clinician orders healers, I ask them what screw they want to use in their temporary prosthetic, and we send them healers with that screw geometry in it. So they're using the same screw the day of surgery and the same screw for the insertion of that first temporary. So it kind of speeds up the clinical workflow in surgery a little bit too.
Oh, that makes great sense. So why don't we just take them one by one? Let's deep dive into the desk screw, the geometry, maybe pull up that three shape file we had so we can look at the way that the screw interfaces with the zirconia. I assume for many or most cases, it's going to be a zirconia arch that it's interfacing with. Full frame zirconia, it interfaces direct, even with your superstructure. Is the screw is interfacing, making contact with the zirconia frame as well, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's start with the screw on the left, the desk screw, and let's also start with the topic being like monolithic zirconia. So I've got here the Bullard alignment healer. It's in 3Shape 3D viewer, just so we can kind of talk about different aspects of this screw. So the first thing that is jumps out to me the most is
Make it a
that it
little
has
bigger
a,
for me. Can we
yeah.
zoom in? There we go. Perfect.
So the thing that stands out to me the most right off the bat is that this screw has a flat engaging interface with that prosthetic. So the screw is going to insert down this channel, and then it's actually going to put pressure here on these flat surfaces as it holds that prosthetic down. So let's dive into the desk screw a little bit. There's a couple different versions. There's quite a few different versions, but one of the main differences would be the thickness or the screw length, the screw thread length. How much of those threads is going to go through the prosthetic before it engages with the MUA? So when we're talking about monolithic zirconia, PMMA, temporary, we're going to want to have more material underneath that screw head to hold that arch down. It will prevent fractures and things like that. Now, when we split a case, something like a titanium substructure, and that screw engages with metal, we change actually to a screw that has a shorter screw thread length, and it engages with a thinner portion of titanium. So that's kind of the big differences there on flat screw seats. Another thing we
Hold on.
can talk. Yeah.
Question on that. So when a doctor is using one of your I-bar style, so a titanium substructure with a zirconia superstructure, the desk screw is interfacing with titanium or with zirconia?
When they are split with the titanium substructure, the screw is only engaging with the metal. The zirconia portion is just a channel that screw falls through. On all of the screws, even with tapered walls or Powerball shaped interfaces, that engaging portion will be in metal.
Okay, so then there's a benefit to your I-bar, the split file design. So the zirconia is retained over the structure by mechanical retention and cement, and it's not retained by any forces from the screw itself. The screw is holding in place the tie bar essentially, and that's it.
Yes, and that is a great thing to get out there. There's a lot of these split cases. That's a big factor of them is that zirconia superstructure. It's just the aesthetic part. It's just the functioning part that is cemented to the bar, and and then those screws go down through the channels and then engage with that bar.
So if you don't like the idea of a screw adding any torque or tension or pressure to your zirconia, then the I-bar style design that you promote and that you offer, that you're passionate about, in that scenario, there's zero torque on zirconia. It's just screw to titanium. That's pretty cool. I actually
Yes.
just learned that just now.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's a big proponent of these I-bar cases. It's just longevity of the prosthetic. And that brings up another topic. I think it's a good time to transition even maybe to the next screw. Let's go to our next screw here, which is the Vortex. So again, I do like this screw. It's a great option for monolithic zirconia. It's good for I-bar cases. It's great for being and having the ability to angle screw channels. One thing that to kind of bounce off of our last topic, the walls and them engaging with that prosthetic. When you mill a titanium bar and you have these screws with tapered walls, the titanium never shrinks or warps. So it's perfect. When these screws go down, they go in with no binding, no holding up, nothing impeding that engagement of the screw. When you have zirconia arches, monolithic, if there's any bit of warp or distortion in that arch or difference between the zirconia arch and the MUA, now you're putting extra force on some of these axial or the side walls of that screw head, because then that screw will be off center some on particular implants. So, when we talk about monolithic zirconia, there's a couple things that I sort of am hesitant on. And one of them is that using these angled screws, their theory is to hold down with pressure on all these axial walls. And if you have the zirconia distort, it kind of throws all that out the window. So just a little side
And
note there.
that distortion could be as little as like 50 to 100 microns, and it will be noticeable. So
Yeah, you'll feel
obviously,
it in the driver when you're putting the arch in for sure.
so your preference, if you're using any type of angled screw, is to go the I-bar style, so that there's a perfectly intimate fit between those surfaces and that geometry as it engages.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That way, we talked about this some tolerance, like what's built into this fudge factor to make things work in dentistry. And it's a tolerances are built into everything, the screws, the MUAs, the implants. And so for me, I would rather the tolerance or that discrepancy not be between the entire arch and the implant, but with I-bar, that discrepancy is when cementing the teeth to the bar. So if you've got a small discrepancy there, to me is not quite as critical as a discrepancy where the MUAs are going to seat and screws are going to torque down.
That is a really good call out there. You have a little bit of forgiveness with the cementation of the zirconia over the substructure, but less forgiveness when you're torquing screws into a geometry.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Let's go back to the desk, because there was a tool used, the T tool, and milling this 90-degree angle here. Obviously, we know a round burr is not gonna get that 90-degree angle there. So you were saying you use a special burr tool, something like
Yeah,
this to.
let's put these up here. So this is just for reference again. I currently use a tool from Follow Me North America. They make two different millimeters of T tools. One is a 1.4 millimeter and the other is 1.6 millimeter. And you use those just depending on which screw you're trying to manufacture. But the way those tools are made is the shaft of the tool is really narrow. And then the tip of it, kind of here where you see these cutting edges, is T-shaped. It's actually wider at the tip of that tool than the shaft is. So what that allows, the width of this T portion, that width is just barely narrower than this screw thread section. So the tip of this tool can just barely fit through this channel, and then it will oscillate the shaft portion of that tool, and it will run that shaft so that the T portion cuts a perfect 90-degree screw
Now,
seat.
why is your approach up through the bottom and not down through the top?
It could be down through the top on a non-angled screw case.
Ah, yeah, angled screw channel throw you way off.
Yeah, if you have a screw channel coming off to the side here, then it is impossible to mill this portion here with that 90-degree screw seat. And while we're talking about that, the kind of newest screw I've been working on is this DES. It's the 19069. It is their new angled screw. So you can see it has a flat screw seat, but it also has a tapered section in the opposite way than a Vortex or a Rosen would be. So that achieves two things. One, it allows for the tolerance of that screw seat to be larger because we don't have a tapered wall. So the screw head thickness is barely narrower than this channel. So you can imagine there's a little space on the left and around the entire screw head. That is the tolerance of these screws. So you can imagine that channel can be off just slightly and the screw still goes down the channel and engages. When you have an angled channel that screw then needs to drop through, this portion here, let's see if I can zoom in a bit. This portion here, this tapered away from the screw channel portion, that actually helps it slide down the corner where that angle of the
Yep.
screw channel is placed. That
Yeah,
makes
the
sense.
top of the screw is angled in so it can turn the corner and seat.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. So yeah,
All
good
right.
top there.
So milling with the T tool, pretty critical for desks. So maybe a little more milling complexity, but then the benefit would be you've got a nice flat seat, flat engagement with your zirconia, and you're not adding any torque or pressure to the walls as maybe some other screws would.
That's right. And I have maybe I'll run this in the background and maybe you can maybe this will stem another portion of our topic. But this is going to show kind of the reason why these tapered screws were created. So it allows for this perfect engagement between the screw and the prosthetic, and it allows a larger portion that it engages with. We'll see here in just a second where it shows kind of a flat screw seat. So this will show if we have a flat screw going in and we have something like distortion or warping of that zirconia and it's engaging with a small portion, then that can potentially lead to a fracture. So that's where this solution of having this tapered
Uh,
wall,
so
that's the
hold on.
science behind it.
In this video, I assume this is a Rosen video, they're showing that distance between the bottom of the screw. So the zirconia thickness right there was a very small shelf
Yes.
or ledge, but then desks, they engineered it to have that thickness is a greater height so that you have more strength, more zirconia material there, right?
So this screw on screen right now would represent more of the flat screws from DES, where it's got this thinner portion. So the benefit here to a Rosen is that it's going to engage with more of this surface, and it's not quite a sharp 90-degree flat surface, so it's less prone to chipping and cracking. That's the theory behind these tapered walls here. So it does in fact sort of snug up against that zirconia the entire length of that screw head.
Then with this Rosen screw, so that's also assuming that your that taper in zirconia was milled perfectly, centered perfectly, and if it's slightly off, you could have pressure in any one part of the screw area. And then also, is there concern about torquing that screw in and then applying this outward pressure in that screw channel? Is there any worry about that?
So I think to better display that, let's do this. Let me show you. So let's take this channel here. So when we manufacture the zirconia portion here, right? When we manufacture this and then when it gets out of the sintering furnace, what is critical is that, let me see if I can change my color here, that this channel and the screw thread inside the implants here, so this is the threads down in the MUA, that these two cylinders match up perfectly. So if there's any warp that brings, let's say, this channel this way or the other way, outside of perfect, basically, let's say if that channel is now here instead of the initial, then the amount of pressure that will be applied to this wall is much greater than it would be to the opposing wall because we've manufactured something out of perfect. And this screw to me needs to engage with perfect manufactured prosthetics.
Okay, so milling needs to be perfect, sintering needs to be perfect with the Rosen screw. That taper needs to be perfect. So obviously you do offer this. Would you say it just has to you just have to have really good calibrated mills and tools and all that kind of stuff to achieve success with this style?
Yeah, the biggest thing is to try to remove as many potential causes of errors. So we're talking about using the same zirconia for every case, or if you're going to make a change like material, do testing before you put it into production. Certainly having your sintering furnaces, calibrated, not contaminated, the sintering programs, just making sure there's a term in the lab that says don't press the button. Definitely don't sinter them on sintering programs that are not intended for that zirconia. The more variables you can eliminate, the more perfect your prosthetics will be.
Awesome. So let's go back to the three shape view and just
Okay.
continue our way through. So that was so we covered the DES. Well, I want to go back to the DES channel here. That zirconia ledge is a little bit thicker in this newer DES screw, right? The ledge between the bottom of the seat of the screw itself and the top of the MUA.
The length here, and this is the DES 19406 screw. So this is their screw for engaging with zirconia um, and temporary PMMA prosthetics. The final screw from DES, we use the 19306. Instead of having 1.3 millimeters of thickness, it has something like 0.3 millimeters of thickness. And we use that screw when we're holding down titanium. The new screw from DES, and we've seen just the new images from DES do show it holding down temporary prosthetics, zirconia prosthetics, and titanium. What I'm exploring with them now is this, they're showing 1 millimeter of thickness here. Is that something we can vary? Is that something that I can, let's say if I'm going to zirconia, can I make this 1.3 millimeters thick? Or if I'm going to titanium, can I make that zero point 0.3 or thinner? A lot of the screw companies, Vortex and Rosen in particular, they offer multiple different thicknesses of that particular portion, most of the time using the same screw. All it's doing is changing the design and then inherently changing your cam, how you mill it.
Okay, and that makes sense, right? So for zirconia, you'd want that thickness to be a little bit thicker. For titanium, you'd want it thinner because it's the materials behave differently with that torque and tension on there.
Yep,
Awesome.
that's exactly right.
So that was DES and Rosen. Which one was next?
Let's go with Powerball.
Okay.
And honestly, let's go to Vortex because that's kind of, I put Vortex and Rosen in a similar category. They're angleable. They're different lengths. They are achieving similar goals. So I don't know that there's much difference there, that I could kind of weigh one versus the other. I don't know. Are there any things just looking at the shapes of them that stand out to you that might bring up a topic of discussion?
Well, this one we're looking at right now is Vortex, right?
Yeah.
It
Yep.
does look like it engages or like seats into there's like a final seat point with the zirconia, where the Rosen screw, it's just the walls themselves is what's engaging. That's really the only difference that I'm seeing there. Is that correct?
Yep. That's
As far
exactly
as
right.
how the screw engages.
Vortex kind of has this like cup shape to it, and I do notice when I go to seat these screws that it's a nice, clean, no bind, and then once it finds its home, bam, it found its home. Whereas with Vortex, you might
You
start to
mean Rosen?
feel that pressure.
This is
Oh yeah,
Rosen.
that's right. I'm sorry. With Rosen, you might start to feel that pressure in your driver. So that's when you're really kind of you want to make sure you're using torque drivers and things that you can kind of limit or monitor the amount of torque you're putting on those screws.
Yeah, what's the user feedback that the Rosen is fully seated? Is it just a torque measurement? Because with the Vortex, you can see like it's going to go from not a lot of torque to then boom, like you're kind of hitting a little bit of a wall, like you
Yes.
know you're there. But with the Rosen screw, it's more gradual, and like
I
the
think
torque is like just gently
hope,
increasing as you seat.
hopefully we can get some responses to this, some end user input in the comments. I for one like to have that know for sure know that that screw is all the way down, rather than just relying on, oh, I got 15 Newton centimeters of torque. It's nice to know and feel that screw just stop and engage crisp and clean, rather than just sort of feeling like it binds as it goes down. That's just my personal opinion.
Makes sense. Makes sense. All right. Anything more about the Vortex before we move on?
I don't think so. I mean, that's the thing. These screws are a hot topic. There's a lot of them on the market. They're really they're achieving. They all tick a couple different boxes, but really, it's not too big of a world. It's not that big of a challenge. There's not that many different variations. I think that can be produced.
All right. So then last is Powerball, right?
Yeah, and this one we'll see kind of a significant difference in the shape. This screw has its own unique geometry. There's a few different versions on the screen here. I have the 2.0 straight version on screen. There's a couple different versions where this screw thread wall is tapered. There's different lengths, again, with that thickness in between. You can see here in the standard length, this 2 millimeters of zirconia, and that's really where this screw shines, is monolithic zirconia cases. But that's substantial. 2 full millimeters of solid zirconia underneath 4 or 6 screws. I mean, that arch is in there solid. I
And
really
with
think
that,
that Powerball was one of the first ones to come on the market to allow, the severe angles of screw channels. That screw has a driver that allows, a significant amount of angle for each one of the screws.
so it allows for angled screw channels, and also I'm noticing the spherical approach, right? So there you don't need the T milling tool, right? Like a standard milling tool that has a spherical end to it can mill out that geometry for the Powerball. I assume that was intentional to make that geometry easier to achieve with standard zirconia tools.
Yes, that is exactly right, and was the exact intention of it. And when you're in the design program and you go to do things like angle this screw channel, so the toughest portion would be like here to
Ooh,
mill from this direction.
yeah, yeah.
But
How do you
in
get
the
that?
design software, it allows for the tools to get in there. So it will start to do things like eliminate portions of that screw channel, making them not perfectly cylindrical to allow for easier milling with standard tools.
Okay, that's good. So you better give yourself an ability to get in there with the tool, otherwise you're never going to get all that zirconia out of the way that you need to.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I've talked about this in some of the milling stuff, but every time you mill something, you can calculate it and then you can simulate it. You can see how well it's going to mill. So we do that on all the cases before we send them to the mill. Just ensure that, exactly like we're looking at here, everything is milled out perfectly.
Yeah, so the milling simulation would tell you, hey, buddy, I can't get in there to get this zirconia out because it's subtractive, and then so it would just kick you off a warning or just show you the leftover material that it's not going to remove. So
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. I think the biggest thing that stands out to me when I use this screw, if we were to compare it to something like the desk screw here, let's turn this guy on in here. So I've got the wireframe of both here on the right hand side of the screen. But what I want to show is, let me turn Powerball off. This width is 2.3 millimeters. So this is what you're going to see coming through your design. That's going to be
That's
coming
your
through the occlusal surface. That's this channel, this hole that's going to be in your prosthetic. So when I compare this 2.3 millimeter channel to something like the Powerball, and I'm looking at almost 3 millimeters of space of a screw channel is going to be taken out of my arch. So when I'm looking down a final prosthetic and I see six 3 millimeter holes, it just impedes the design, and then those holes are inherently going to have to be filled in with composite, if not detailed, possibly even characterized by the doctor as they're put in to disguise them.
well, and the overall thickness of zirconia could matter as far as you need some safety. I don't know what the right term would be, Austin, right? Like the safety thickness, like maybe it's on the lingual or whatever, to make sure
Well,
that the zirconia is thick enough around this 3 millimeter screw channels. Because if I am doing full frame zirconia, I don't want to have a thickness violation and then have a stress point that could fracture.
that's right. And here's a big thing to just kind of bounce off of that is this is 4.5, almost 5 millimeters. You could do a good rule of thumb is that like a molar can be 10 millimeters wide. That's half the width of the molar. So you're looking at like a little bit more room on the buccal and lingual for this tooth to be there with a screw channel in it. Much less trying to put that through, that's 3/4 of a bicuspid. It's an entire lateral. It just, it's kind of it's just large in my opinion.
And the angled, so you have this 3 millimeter screw channel. Yes, you can angle it, so that helps. Is the degree of angle in Powerball like a bigger degree of angle compared to others? Is there any angle advantage, or are they all about the same?
I think they all kind of stay in the same 20 to 30 degrees of angle. I want to say, I don't know right off the top of my head, but most of them are in the 20 to 25 degrees of angle. Most mills are capped at 30 degrees of angle. Just depends on, yeah, milling limitations, but most of them are around the 20 degrees. It's not like all of a sudden with this, new screw, you get 50 degrees of angle. Nothing drastic like that.
Well, you're manufacturing under Elite Dental Manufacturing. Excited to see you hit the streets here soon. I know you say you're going to be opening up. Target is in July.
Yeah, that's right. In Augusta, Georgia, July 1st. It's 2,000 square feet, primarily a milling center. Come and hang out, learn some dentistry with me if you want. And then a little bit of a learning center. So I want to maybe have some one-on-one, really more personalized, catered courses for some of these clinicians.
Awesome, Austin. Well, thank you for sharing your insights on screws and the geometries. And of course, you accommodate all of them. There's some pros and cons and maybe some preferences to each. Yeah, any other casework you wanted to show here before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. These are just cases we work on every day. And yeah, I try to promote this whole I-bar titanium substructure thing. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. New websites are going to be online soon, edm.dental, edmdental.com. But certainly look for some new updates on my Instagram, Elite Dental Manufacturing. And I look forward to hearing from you guys.
And while we're looking at this photo, some advantages to using this titanium bar underneath the zirconia superstructure related to screws. What are some advantages it gives you? Does it impact prosthetic space by, thickness? How does this help with the different screws using a titanium substructure?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when we look at something like the temporary prosthetic screw from Des, and we have a much thicker screw thread portion, right? When we change to that final and we have a smaller screw thread portion, what that does is it lets us have thicker zirconia. So I can bring the screw head down into the bar and it engages with a minimal amount of that titanium. But then the prosthetic, the teeth, the functioning portion can be thicker without having to bulk areas. So that is one reason we changed to the thinner screw in the final prosthetics is it just allows for more vertical space between that screw head and the opposing arch.
That. Love that. Well, thank you, Austin. Yeah, it's a great, beautiful photo to end on. I know you're proud of your work. It's beautiful work.
Thank you
And
very much. I appreciate it, Rob. Yeah, I
all
always
right, man.
love talking with you, and I look forward to doing more of these. And I hope they're helpful to the industry.
Thanks so. Thank you, Austin. We'll see you.
Yeah.